Okay, so before we get too far into this, I just want to say that any claims that this epidemic was caused by things like eating bats or bat soup or undercooked bats are not scientifically supported, are xenophobic, and frankly racist. So please don't continue to joke about those things or believe any claims related to that. Also, I think we need to start acknowledging that wildlife trade and things like wildlife markets, hunting wildlife, are not a Chinese problem. This is something that's done all over the world. Look at Texas and rattlesnake roundups. Look at Netflix Tiger King and captive tigers, right? The wildlife trade is a global issue, and pretending that it's just Asians or just the Chinese is again also racist and not conducive to actually solving the problem. So bats do appear to be unusual in that they do host a large diversity and number of coronaviruses. However, I still want to emphasize two things. One is that bats themselves are incredibly diverse. There's over 1,400 species and counting. They make up 20% of all mammal species on Earth, and they are found almost everywhere on the planet, with the exception being Antarctica. So it makes sense that with so many different species, we'd expect to see potentially a lot of different viruses, including coronavirus. Additionally, it's also important to note that not all bats are the same, and so we'd expect not all bats to necessarily have the same number of coronaviruses. And it does appear that certain species or groups of species have bigger numbers of viruses or bigger numbers of coronavirus. And now, partially because bats have been linked to epidemics such as SARS and MERS, we tend to look for viruses in bats more than maybe we are looking in other animals. Bats have been the focus of a lot of research efforts in viral discovery, which is why we know that bats carry so many viruses. However, I think it's important to note that other mammals and other animals do carry viruses which can transmit to humans. And so it's important to just keep in mind that the research in those animals is less extensive. We know less. And so just any time epidemic or something like this comes up, we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions about where these viruses or pathogens have come from until we are able to do the research and have the evidence in hand. And finally, I just want to emphasize that this type of thing does not happen in a vacuum. So whether it's bats or some other animal that has potentially eventually caused this infection, we can't blame the animals. Humans, as a species, we've had a huge impact on the environment through things like habitat destruction and expansion and agriculture. And so we need to acknowledge that all of that destruction and development has brought us into closer contact with these animals and with this wildlife. And the more we continue to change our environment, the more we're going to see similar things like this due to that increased contact. And we also have to acknowledge our implicit biases and the racism inherent in some of these systems, and that the people who are going to be most harmed by these epidemics, by changes in climate, are going to be those rural communities, the low-income communities, indigenous communities who are already at greater risk of these things. And so moving forward, we need to avoid falling into environmental fascism rules and thinking about or talking about, oh, it's human population causing these problems, and really think about that this is not happening in a vacuum. We need to have a holistic view of how to not only conserve wildlife, try to stop the wildlife trade, but also address the issues, the economic issues that have been driven by capitalism that have resulted in some of these development and hunting changes.